Hey guys, Frank Spear back with you for another episode of Watch This. Just got done watching a video from a guy who is teaching on 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and teaching that the reason Paul says if you're married to act as if you're not, if you're buying and selling to act as if you don't own any of those possessions, so forth and so on. The reason for Paul's admonitions here is because the rapture was coming and they were going to be whisked away into an invisible realm and taken off the planet. So none of that would have mattered anymore. I want to try to show here that I hold a different position. I don't think that's what's happening at all. And so I want to kind of whip through this chapter and show you what I think is happening. And let me just lay out what I think is being spoken about here, and then we'll try to bear that out from the passages. I think what's happening here is Paul is saying this old covenant system is about to pass away. This system of apostate Judaism and the system of the law that they were living under, the 613 old covenant commands, include all the commands in Leviticus regarding marriage and so forth and so on, regarding everything that they had to live under as good Jews, good Israelites. And Paul is saying in this chapter, the form of this present world, that present world is passing away. So if you're married and you're living under the marriage laws, the Jewish marriage laws, act as if those things don't matter anymore, because this world is passing away very shortly, within 20 years of this writing. He's saying these things aren't going to matter anymore in the new kingdom. I think that's what's happening. You'll notice in verse 1, no, actually, let's skip down here. Let's begin verse 26. He's giving all these rules about marriage and remaining unmarried, and if you're burning with lust and passion for a woman or for a man, that it's not a sin to get married, so forth and so on, as the last days of old covenant system was approaching, right? The last days were where they were living in those last days, and as the end was approaching, Paul is giving rules for marriage and for how to live during that transition period, as the old was passing away and the new was coming. People had a lot of questions. What are we supposed to do about living under the law now? All these rules and regulations that we currently live under, what do we do now that that's about to end? And we're moving towards that end. That's what's happening in context in the chapter. So when you get down to verse 26, he says, I think that this is a good view in light of this present distress, the hardships that we're going through, the persecutions that we're going through during this transition period, from the Jews persecuting us, saying that we're heretics and that we're apostate because we're no longer abiding by by Judaism and so forth. He says, I think that this is good in view of the present distress. That word can actually be translated violence, crisis. In view of this present crisis, it's good for a man to remain unmarried if he can. But he says, whatever condition you're in, don't change it. Are you bound to a wife? He says, then don't seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Don't seek a wife then. We're living in troubled times, right? The Neronic persecution was coming in 64. This was most likely written in 54. So 10 years from now is going to be a great persecution throughout the entirety of the Roman Empire against Christians, even against Jews, right? So these guys were going to get double whammy if they were Christian Jews, right? So he's saying these are troubled times, times of distress that we live in. If you're not married, don't bother now during this time when the Jews are persecuting us now, and then the Romans are going to persecute us in the future. Okay? I mean, Paul was in prison. Paul was most likely beheaded by the Romans. So that trouble did come. Many, many, many died. Were sold off into captivity and slavery, so forth. Fed to the lions for sport, for Roman sport. Watch this. But if you marry, you've not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she's not sinned. Yet such will have trouble in this life. And I'm trying to spare you. So nothing really revelatory here, nothing amazing, nothing difficult, right? He's saying, look, in light of the present what we're living through presently in this transition period of the passing away of the old covenant system and the coming of the new, it's better if you're not married to stay unmarried for now, right? You might even die during this time. Then your wife might die and your children, and you don't want all that. That's what he's saying. He's saying, now verse 29, but this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on those who have wives should live as though they have none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess anything. Right? And listen, this is a key passage. And those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, because the form of this world is passing away. That's the key verse. What world? We all know, right? If we're good preterists, we understand that the world that was passing away was the old covenant system. Now, if this is talking about a rapture and they were going to be whisked away into some invisible realm, why does Paul say here, right? Those who make use of the world as though they did not make full use of it, right? Because, right, the form of this world is passing away. Well, who cares? Listen, the word form there, it means the condition of this world, the shape of this present old covenant world, right? The circumstances, the patterns, the habits, right? The customs of this old world of Judaism is passing away. Well, I would ask, if Paul's talking about the rapture here, a literal rapture, I would ask him, what does that matter if the old covenant system is passing away? We're not going to be here anyway. You're talking about us going into an invisible realm, right? What are you wasting time telling us that the old covenant system's going to pass away here on the planet Earth for? It doesn't make any sense. What does make sense is that Paul is talking about the marriage laws, and he's saying, don't be concerned with the way that the world, old covenant Judaism, views what you're doing with marriage or not marrying or so forth during this time period, because that system is passing away, right? Revelation, what was passing away? Just to show that the same thing Paul is talking about here, John was talking about in the book of Revelation, right? Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, Revelation 21:1, right? A new covenant system. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away. So if the first heaven and the first earth that passed away are the world that was passing away in 1 Corinthians 7, why is the world to come an unseen, invisible realm when that world that passed away was not? Why does it have to be, is a better question. Doesn't it make more sense if the one world that was passing away was a covenant system on planet Earth, that the new heavens and earth would be a covenant system on planet Earth as well? There's nothing that necessitates that this is talking about a kingdom that would take place in some invisible realm. And certainly Paul is not mentioning anything like that in 1 Corinthians 7. You would think that he would just come flat out and say it, right? Why go through all this rigmarole? Why not just say, look, folks, if you're married, it doesn't matter. If you have possessions, it doesn't matter, because we're all going to be whisked away off the planet. We're not going to be on the planet anymore. Just say it. It'll take you one verse, one sentence. But he doesn't. He goes through all this. If you're a virgin, this. If you're a man who has a virgin daughter, don't worry about letting her get married. You're not sinning. If you're married already, act as if you're not married. What is he saying there in that passage? Why is the time short? The time is short. The old system is even closer to passing away than when this whole thing started, right? With the resurrection of Jesus or the teaching of Jesus. We're closer now, right? We're almost 20 years closer to it at this point, right? After Christ's resurrection. We're 20 years closer to the passing away of apostate Judaism and that whole system. So he says the time is short. So don't get bogged down in all this Jewish marriage stuff, right? Now, act as if you had none. What does that mean? Well, there were all kinds of rules for married couples under Judaism. And he's saying, don't worry about those. Act as if you had no wife in that system. Act as if none of those things matter anymore. Look, down here he says, watch this, verse 31 is a key passage. And he's going on and saying, and if you weep, all right, and if you rejoice, act as if you don't. And if you buy as though you don't. All of that is connected to the world of Judaism, because look, and those who use the world make use of the temple system and the rules and regulations of Judaism. He says, and those who make use of the world, right, live as if you do not make use of it, because the form of that world is passing away. It's all connected to Judaism and that system. That's what was going away. That's the context of the chapter, not a literal rapture where they were going to be sucked off the planet. You can go look up the marriage laws, read Leviticus, read Exodus, read Deuteronomy, right? There were all kinds of rules and regulations for married people under the Jewish law. So there you have it. That's my take. Take that and run with it and do further study and see which one makes more sense to you, which one holds up more accurately with the scriptures. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Oh, well, before I go, I just want to say that the teacher that I listened to makes it sound like any other perspective other than Paul talking about a literal rapture here would be ridiculous. He says they're out in the nations, right? So this is not talking about AD 70 that wouldn't affect them at all. Well, of course it would affect them. The war might not have affected them where they were living, scattered out, throughout the Roman Empire. But the passing away of the old covenant system that these Jews here would have been partaking of and being faithful to some degree would pass away. So all Paul is saying here is, look, guys, that whole thing you're worried about, the law and what are the priests going to think and what is my family going to think if I'm not being faithful to Judaism and so forth, and that whole old covenant system, he's saying that's about to end. It's even closer now than at the beginning, obviously, right? And these are troubled times. See you next time.